Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. He called her name menacingly, and she stopped to examine the unfamiliar silhouette in the darkness. The stranger quickly approached her and grabbed her. She squealed loudly, but a sharp pain knocked her off her feet and the girl fell. The disappearance of people is not an uncommon phenomenon. We live in a disturbing world in which all sorts of things happen to people. Sometimes they disappear through their own fault or through the fault of an intruder. There are many mysterious and unsolved cases of missing citizens all over the world. Analyzing missing persons reports and reviewing police reports shows that the number of disappearance cases has multiplied in 2 decades. Today, let's talk about a case that is still considered one of the worst injustices in the history of the Spanish judicial system. Because decades later, Spain cannot forget the story that took place on the Costa del Sol. This story has everything: love, disappearance, blood, and cruel injustice, which will definitely be corrected, but at a very high cost, which for many years will be remembered not only by Spaniards, but also by the whole world. Hilaria Alicia Hornos was born December 2, 1952 in the rural province of Jaén in the municipality of Arroyo de los Llancos, Spain. At the age of 24, Alicia fell in love and married a Dutch citizen, Willem Waninkoff. Soon the family had their firstborn son Guillermo, then a daughter Rosa, then another daughter Rocio. With the appearance of children, the relationship between the spouses became quite tense. Willem became addicted to drinking, and because of the long absences and lost his job. At the peak of loud arguments, Willem raised his voice at Alicia and could even hit. In order to provide for her family, Alicia had to take a job as a maid in a hotel in Ibiza. It was during this difficult period of her life that Alicia met Dolores Vasquez, who was the director of the hotel where she worked. Maria Dolores Vasquez was the daughter of immigrants from Galicia, Spain, who had settled in the UK. She had a good education and was well-mannered and an interesting conversationalist. A strong friendship developed between the two women, which later developed into a love relationship. A year after the beginning of the relationship with Dolores, Alicia dared to leave her husband and officially formalize the divorce. Willem returned to the Netherlands, and Alicia moved in with Dolores. Soon the women in love bought a new house in Malaga. After the divorce, Alicia received full custody of the 3 children and raised them with Dolores. After her parents divorced in 1983, Rocio and her sister Rosa looked up to Dolores as a second mother and proudly signed Vasquez Hornos. All 3 of Alicia's children adored Dolores. The 5 of them lived in complete love and understanding as a true family. In 1988, the women decided to break off their love relationship, but continued to live together as good friends until 1994. After 11 years together, they finally broke up and Alicia started dating another man, Juan Cerrillo. Alicia moved into a new home and fully immersed herself in a new romantic relationship. Life for her was filled with new colors and love. Because the children grew up, the beloved man was always near. But at one point, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. On the morning of October 10th, 1999, Alicia did not find her daughter Rocio at home. At first, Alicia wasn't worried, believing her daughter might have spent the night at her boyfriend's or one of her friends' houses. But when she didn't return home later, Alicia became concerned. The family contacted Rocio's friends and boyfriend, hoping to get reassuring information about their daughter's whereabouts, but no one had seen her. On September 9th, Rocio left home around 5:30 p.m. after saying goodbye to her mother and older sister, Rosa. On that day, she was going with her boyfriend Antonio and her friends to go to a fair in Fuengirola. The girl's house was in the neighborhood of La Cortiera, very close to Antonio's house. Rocio stayed at his house until 10:30 in the evening and decided to return home for a short while to shower and change clothes before meeting her boyfriend and friends at the fair. She never made it home. Even though Alicia was already worried, she decided to take a walk with Juan to calm down rather than immediately report her daughter's disappearance to the police. As they were walking down the street, the woman saw a large blood stain on the road, as if some animal had been killed. She told Juan about it. At first, they didn't pay much attention to it, but when they got closer, Alicia saw sneakers with drops of blood. They were her daughter's sneakers. From Alicia Hornos's recollection, I got closer and saw my daughter's sneakers. I said, "Those are Rocio's sneakers." And he said, "No way." I said, "No, those are my daughter's sneakers." I was hysterical. I said, "Call the police, those are her sneakers." During that walk, in addition to the sneakers, a napkin and several bloodstains were found in a vacant lot next to the road Rocio usually walked on. Alicia called the police. Immediately, a missing girl report was filed with a full description. Long hair, brown eyes, wearing a white Nike t-shirt and purple pants. After the officially announced search activities, the forensic investigator reported the need to conduct a forensic examination at the alleged crime scene to find out whose blood was on the road and sneakers. After examining the scene, the first assumptions were the version of an assault or a fight in which someone was injured. But the further investigators followed the trail, the more they found blood stains, and even long chains of stains that looked like drag marks. That means someone was moving very fast, maybe even running. Then the blood traces disappeared, and then the search team noticed a very large stain, indicating significant blood loss. They found more and more bloody footprints, similar to the drag marks of a bloody body. These tracks led to car tire prints, after which the blood traces disappeared. A cigarette butt, the brand of which was not common in Spain, was found next to the tread marks. Forensics collected all the samples that could help in any way during the investigation, and DNA from the samples was supposed to help find whoever was at the scene. Based on this data, a thorough investigation was conducted. Along with the investigation and the identification of the blood taken from the traces found, the search for the girl continued. But the investigators were almost certain that Rocio Waninkoff had been murdered. After all, the blood trail started from the sidewalk and continued to a pool of blood large enough to cause her death from volumetric blood loss. Next to the pool were drag marks, and intersecting them and the blood were tire tracks left by a small car with a tire model that was discontinued in 1993. Because the drag marks continued across a heavily sloped area that would have made it difficult for one person to drag the body alone, it was believed that the body was dragged by at least two people and then left in a less open area of the vacant lot before a vehicle pulled up to transport the body. But the search did not stop. Volunteers scoured the area on foot, on motorcycles, up hills. Everyone wanted to find Rocio, but at the same time, they were afraid to find her dead. It was very hard for everyone. There were flyers with Rocio's picture everywhere. All the news channels reported about her disappearance. The family actively cooperated with journalists, because as long as Rocio was being talked about, she would not be forgotten. Journalists from all TV channels were on duty at Rocio Waninkoff's house. Everyone wanted the girl to come home, to find her. Time passed, but the search did not yield any results. A few days after Rocio's disappearance, a local cab driver showed up at the police station and said that on the night of the incident, around 10 p.m., he dodged an SUV that was speeding in the oncoming lane of traffic in the area where the girl's sneakers were found on the curb. He added that he heard a piercing scream as he passed the vehicle. There was no doubt, Rocio had been kidnapped and killed by an unknown assailant. This was confirmed by DNA analysis. The blood on the road belonged to Rocio Waninkoff. The family was at a loss for words. These feelings were spreading fast. They were felt not only by the girl's family and friends, but by the whole of Spain. On November 2nd, 1999, 25 days after Rocio's disappearance, a disfigured body, possibly Rocio's, was found near the Los Altos del Rodeo Sports Club, between Marbella and San Pedro de Alcantara. The body was partially covered with bushes and fallen leaves, and was hidden behind a hedge separating a housing development that was quite close to the highway. It was a narrow path that could hardly be traveled by car. The girl was searched for within the confines of her home, and she was found in another town. When the police arrived at the place, they found the body very badly decomposed. During the evidence collection, large black garbage bags were found containing the girl's clothes. One of the bags had the number 8 painted on it, indicating that the bags had not been purchased specifically for the transportation of the body, but had only been reused. Upon discovering the clothes, Investigators concluded that the clothes could have belonged to the missing Rocio Waninkoff. The missing person's sister, Rosa, recognized several rings, 2 t-shirts, and other items found in 2 garbage bags near the body as belonging to Rocio. The t-shirts were torn from stab wounds, and clothing below the waist was never found. The remains of the body were taken to the lab for forensic analysis. 6 forensic experts worked slowly and meticulously all night, using all their knowledge and skills. They had a difficult job ahead of them because the body was badly decomposed. Decomposition is much faster in rain and heat when there is a certain amount of humidity. Not a single organ was preserved, only the bones were intact. The goal was to find something else that could help the investigation and tell us how the attack took place. As a result, numerous close wounds were found, and there were 8 stab wounds on his back, caused by a weapon with a single-sided blade. According to experts, the attack was very fast and brutal. Most likely the victim was immobilized or did not have time to react. Fingerprints were found on plastic bags that were found where the body was found. Police already had fingerprints and tire prints from the car. They also found 2 tissue samples on Rocio Waninkoff's body. At that point, there was still too little evidence that would lead to the arrest of a specific suspect. But the investigation had some evidence, data, and leads that the Civil Guard was looking into. The public pressure had an undue influence, and the investigators were just bound to find something, but they did not. Because Rocio's body was badly decomposed, it was impossible to establish basic details, such as whether the girl had been sexually assaulted. Investigators came to one conclusion when they saw a corpse with its legs spread apart. Since the victim's legs were spread too wide, they thought it was staged. That is, the perpetrator made it look like violence. So they ruled out the motive of sexual assault and subsequent murder, and focused on a crime motivated by revenge and hatred. It was a very emotional attack, which meant that the girl could have been attacked by someone very close to her, who may have been very upset with her. With the evidence and facts gathered, the investigators conducted follow-up interviews. First of all, the investigators questioned her boyfriend, Antonio Hirata. He was the last person to see Rocio alive, and he was the one she was supposed to meet again that night. But the guy had an alibi, because he just fell asleep at home and did not go to the fair that day. All of Rocio's relatives and friends were questioned, but they all had solid alibis. A year after Rocio Waninkoff's death, the Civil Guard was able to narrow down the number of suspects, and by the end of the year they found a suspect who, in the opinion of the investigation, all the signs pointed to. That person turned out to be Dolores Vasquez. There was absolutely no evidence against Dolores, but thanks to the media, everyone began to believe this woman was guilty. Dolores Vasquez was a close friend of Alicia's. As it often happens, journalists distorted and even invented information. Allegedly, Alicia from the very first day accused Dolores in the death of her daughter. But at the time of the crime, their relationship had already ended 4 years ago. The investigation actively went after the public. The investigation focused entirely on Dolores, and now there was a motive in the case. A young girl could be a hindrance, or otherwise interfere with the romantic relationship between the 2 women. Everyone said that if it hadn't been for Rocio, maybe Alicia would have gone back to Dolores. It was Dolores' way of getting back at Alicia for not wanting to go back to her. That's what people said. In the eyes of the press and the public, Dolores Vasquez was guilty from the moment she was arrested. Even though the woman did not confess to anything, residents were convinced of her guilt mainly because the police believed that someone close to her was the killer. Family members claimed that Dolores was an aggressive and violent woman who was also very jealous. Alicia told reporters that Dolores was a vindictive and cruel person. The public condemned Dolores. The fact that Dolores Vasquez was non-traditional was a reason to attack her during the trial. This was not the norm in Spain. A sarcastic, aggressive, calculating, cold-blooded woman. The character was beginning to take shape. A vicious, heartless woman. A woman who bided her time for 4 years, finally coming up with a crime plan out of hatred. The audience cheered, having independently created the image of a calculating villainess for Dolores. The trial turned into an entertainment. People watched the trial only because they had nothing better to do. A huge number of people gathered outside the courthouse. People wanted to get into the courthouse to follow the trial and not miss a second. Journalists were all over the news that a close family friend had been charged with the murder of Rocio Wanenkoff. Dolores Vasquez was the kind of woman no one liked. Therefore, she had virtually no chance at trial. She wasn't friendly or nice. But how many people are there in the world who are not sociable and friendly with everyone? We don't call them all criminals because they don't smile at us when we meet them, do we? In this case, the battle was fought not only in the courthouse, but also on the streets where the public was involved. All of the information, especially the rumors that the media blew up, could not help but influence the opinion of the jury. After all the TV stations, almost all the TV shows were saying that Dolores Vasquez was the one responsible for Rocio's death, as well as all the information that the reporters were distorting. So a lie told 1,000 times became the truth for Dolores. In fact, there was absolutely no evidence against Dolores Vasquez, but apparently justice just decided that someone should be in jail for it, and chose a victim who had a dubious alibi, as well as a bunch of flaws that automatically made her a scapegoat. Dolores wasn't seen at the scene. The tire tracks didn't match the car she drove. The fabric fibers found didn't match Vasquez's clothes. Nor did the fingerprints found on the trash bags at the scene. And she also had an alibi. She claimed that she was babysitting her sick mother that day while watching her little niece. But this was disregarded. More than 50 people were called to court to testify. Only once did Dolores take the stand. "I didn't kill Rocio. I didn't even see her that day. All I'm asking all of Spain, is to find who did it because it wasn't me, and whoever did it is still out there. Maybe even among you in the courtroom. There has never been any evidence against me and there never will be because I am innocent." Spain has a very poor judicial system that often oversteps the law. Spanish prosecutors and investigating judges are ready to step over the law and human fate to prove their theories. Absolute disregard for the law. There was no physical evidence, so the Civil Guard report described only the circumstantial evidence that pointed to Dolores Vasquez and profiled her psychologically. The jury majority found defendant Dolores Vasquez guilty of murder. She was sentenced to a 16-year prison term. The public rejoiced. Rocio's funeral was very well attended. Journalists were constantly filming despite other people's grief. At that moment, all of Rocio's relatives and all the people in the town lived in fear. This fear fueled the many television programs that covered the details of the case. After Dolores' arrest, the victim's family went from one television program to another, pulling out old stories that confirmed Vasquez's cold, unfriendly, demanding, and cruel character. It took years and another similar crime to make it clear that Rocio Wanenkoff was not at all as the public and the press had fantasized. On the morning of August 15, 2003, the parents of 17-year-old Sonia Carabantes reported their daughter's disappearance to the police. They had already called her friends, but they said that they had walked her friend to the door of her house. But Sonia wasn't home. In the street, 3 doors down from her house, right next to a tree, her parents found her shoes, purse, and phone. There were traces of blood on the cars parked nearby. Sound familiar? But if the suspect has been in jail for almost a year and a half, did the police make a mistake and have an innocently convicted person in jail? Authorities immediately began searching for and investigating the coin incident. Time passed, and despair increasingly gripped the family. There were searches in the neighborhood, but the bloodstains on Sonia's clothes left no hope for a favorable outcome. One of the main pieces of evidence in Sonia's case was a car headlight. The officers of the Civil Guard made inquiries to all the car repair shops in search of a car with a broken headlight that matched the description. There were a variety of different theories of the attack. Among them were chains of rape and other similar crimes to the disappearance of the girl in Motril. But the important fact remained that Rocio and Sonia had disappeared during the fair. All employees of the fair who worked in Motril and Coin were checked. Just as in the case of Rocio, flyers with Sonia's image were posted everywhere. So many people were involved in the search for her. They were very active in helping the police, not only by donating their time, but also by providing any assistance needed for the search. In addition to these searches, the Civil Guard also continued their investigation. The main objective was to find the girl alive, but on the 5th day after her disappearance, with the help of search dogs, Sonia's body was found near Coin. It was found in a creek under a pile of rocks. It had rained heavily the night before, washing away any trace that might have helped the police in locating the culprit. On the day of her disappearance, Sonia was at a fair in Coin. She said goodbye to friends near her home. It was there that she was attacked. The perpetrator hit her several times, which made Sonia partially unconscious, and she was unable to fight back because the attack was sudden and violent. The perpetrator then took her away in a car to a remote location away from her home. Both internal and external injuries were inflicted, and then the girl was strangled, which was the cause of death. Due to the fact that Sonia was found very quickly, it was possible to collect all the evidence and analyze the results of the forensic examination. Colonel Pacagabella reported that important evidence was indeed found on the body of Sonia Carabantes. The biological material was analyzed and then entered into the police criminal DNA database, where the much-anticipated matches were obtained with the genetic material found on the cigarette butt that was found at the crime scene in the Rocio Waninkoff case. When the two DNA samples were compared, they were found to be identical to each other. The man who killed Rocio in 1999 and the man who attacked Sonia turned out to be the same person. The news was incredible. Dolores Vasquez, who had been condemned without exaggeration by the whole of Spain, turned out to be innocent, while the real culprit walked free and took the life of another young girl. The puzzle is complete. An English brand cigarette butt and skin particles under the victim's fingernails, the DNA from both pieces of evidence belonged to the same person. After that, events began to unfold very quickly. On September 18th, a young woman, Cecilia Pantoja, contacted the police and said she suspected her ex-husband when she saw bloodstains on his t-shirt, just days after Sonia's body was found. She said her husband was also absent from home twice, traveling somewhere in a car on the day of the Rocio attack. Through DNA testing and the woman's testimony, police were able to identify the real killer of Rocio and Sonia. The perpetrator's name was Tony King, and he was well known in Britain as the Holloway Strangler. Tony Alexander King's crime wave began when he was still a teenager in the Holloway neighborhood of North London. In 1985, the neighborhood was the scene of a series of attacks on women in which the victims were strangled and abused. At the time, King went by his birth name, Anthony Bromwich. 5 weeks later, he was finally caught and convicted at the age of 19 for strangling 5 women to unconsciousness with a rope or cable and then abusing them. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison, calling him a monster for committing the crimes because of his own inadequacy. He served only half of his sentence and was paroled in 1991, but returned to prison a few weeks later for robbing a woman and threatening her with a knife. In search of a new life, he changed his name to Tony King, married Cecilia Pantoja, and tried to live a normal family life. Their marriage produced a daughter, but King soon returned to his old habits. The police in Spain realized that they were on the right track. Tony King was put under 24-hour surveillance, and a month after Sonia's death he was arrested. Under questioning, Tony King confessed to killing 2 innocent girls. After his arrest, he said he followed Rocio as she entered a busy street on her way home from her boyfriend's house and held a razor to her neck. When she tried to free herself from her attacker, the razor stabbed into Rocio's neck. The monster panicked and stabbed her 9 times. In 2005, King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the kidnapping, violence, and murder of Sonia Carabantes. The court ordered him to pay the victim's family the equivalent of about $350,000. He also received an additional 7 years for attempted violence against a woman in Malaga in 2001. The following year, he was also found guilty of the murder of Rocio Waninkoff and received an additional 19-year sentence. Before his trial, King sent letters to Sonia and Rocio's mothers asking for forgiveness. He is currently serving his sentence at Herrera de la Mancha Maximum Security Prison in Ciudad Real in Spain. After the case was closed, a major scandal erupted in Spain over the fact that an innocent man was convicted of the murder of Rocio Waninkoff. We are accustomed to imagining that miscarriages of justice brought to light bring shame to those involved and monetary costs to the state. But this is not the case in Spain. It is difficult to accept and realize, but in the 21st century, not only police and courts can brutally punish an innocent person, But even society may well trample a man into the mud, and even if he manages to prove his case, absolutely no one will apologize. It took more than a year before it became clear that Dolores Vasquez was telling the truth when she dryly and unemotionally repeated that she was innocent. What all of Spain had taken for cruelty and insensitivity turned out to be simply the personality traits of a woman. In 2008, the Spanish Ministry of Justice offered Dolores Vasquez 120,000 euros in compensation, which was less than the 4 million euros that Dolores had originally demanded. But no one ever apologized to Dolores for the way she was treated. Dolores Vasquez, whose parents moved to Spain from Epsom, returned to the UK after she was released from prison. More than 20 years have passed, but Dolores has still not received an apology for the way she was treated, nor has she received any compensation since the case was closed. In 2014, she was working for a transport company in East London and underwent a psychological evaluation after her ordeal. She recently said she is still waiting for an apology after years of anxiety, when she found it difficult to talk to people and find work, for the years of fear and humiliation she lived in. The Dolores Vasquez imprisonment case is considered one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in Spain's judicial history since 1910. Criminals easily get away with it, even if they are stupid enough to leave their DNA behind, simply because they cross the country's border. The police rush to pin the case on at least one person, without going into detail. The press hypes up scandals and digs into the dirty laundry of not only the perpetrators, but also the victims. Society easily labels and considers it normal to put someone in jail just because they dislike that person. It is a pity that such truth is true for absolutely all countries of the world. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you.